12 beach towns along the Australian coast once drew families by the thousands every summer. Sunburnt skin, fish and chips wrapped in paper, kids running barefoot across hot sand. These were the places where Australians built holiday memories that lasted generations. Towns like Rapid Bay and Port Hughes hummed with life from November through March, their caravan parks packed to capacity, their corner shops selling out of ice creams by noon, their beaches dotted with striped umbrellas, stretching as far as you could see. Walk through these same towns today and you will find something deeply unsettling. Empty shop fronts with faded for lease signs swaying in the salt wind. Playgrounds with rusted swings and cracked rubber surfaces. Motels with missing roof tiles and windows boarded up with weathered plywood. The beaches remain beautiful, the water still crystal clear, the sand still white, yet the people are gone. Entire streets stand silent. Businesses that survived 50 years of summers closed their doors for good. Locals who grew up in these towns watched their neighbours pack up and leave, one family at a time, until only a handful remained. This is not a story about natural disasters or sudden economic collapse. This is about something quieter and more unsettling. The slow death of paradise. Today, we investigate 12 Australian beach towns that were once thriving holiday destinations, now reduced to ghost towns. What happened? Who is responsible? And what does it tell us about the future of coastal Australia? Welcome to an honest analysis of Paradise Lost. Australia's coastline stretches more than 36,000 kilometres, lined with hundreds of beach towns that once served as summer escapes for working families. Before cheap international flights made Bali and Thailand accessible, these coastal towns were where ordinary Australians went on holiday. A week in a beach shack cost less than $100. You could catch your own dinner off the jetty. Kids could roam free without supervision. It was simple, affordable, and safe. But tourism changed. Budget airlines made overseas travel cheaper than domestic getaways. Coastal property prices exploded as investors from Sydney and Melbourne bought up beachfront real estate, turning affordable holiday homes into expensive investment properties. The working families who kept these towns alive during summer were priced out. At the same time, industries that supported year-round populations in these towns began to collapse. Fishing quotas tightened to protect dwindling stocks. Small-scale agriculture became unprofitable as droughts intensified and grain prices fell. Young people left for university in the cities and never came back. The result is what we see today. Towns that depended on both summer tourism and year-round local economies found themselves with neither. The infrastructure remains, the beaches are still there, but the lifeblood is gone. Let's examine 12 of these towns and understand exactly what went wrong. Number 1, Rapid Bay, South Australia. Rapid Bay sits at the southern tip of the Fleurieu Peninsula, about 90 kilometres south of Adelaide. In the 1960s and 70s, this town was paradise for divers and fishermen. The jetty, stretching 560 metres into crystal clear water, became one of South Australia's most famous dive sites. Leafy sea dragons, giant cuttlefish, and southern bluefin tuna could be spotted just metres from shore. Families camped in the caravan park, spent their days fishing off the jetty, and their evenings cooking fresh snapper over open fires. The town was built around a limestone quarry that operated from 1940 until 1991. The quarry employed local workers, brought ships into the jetty to collect limestone, and created a year-round economy that supported shops, a post office, and a primary school. When the quarry closed in 1991, the economic foundation of Rapid Bay crumbled overnight. The jetty, no longer needed for industrial shipping, fell into disrepair. The caravan park lost its manager. The general store reduced its hours and eventually closed. Today, Rapid Bay is nearly abandoned. The jetty remains standing, but is unsafe for public use, with sections of the deck collapsed and warning signs posted at the entrance. The caravan park is overgrown with weeds, the amenities block covered in graffiti. A few permanent residents remain in weathered fibro cottages, but the streets are silent. The beach is still beautiful, the water still teeming with marine life, but without the jetty or facilities, tourists no longer come. Rapid Bay is a textbook case of what happens when a single industry collapse takes down an entire town. The government promised jetty repairs for decades, but delivered nothing. The dive tourism that could have saved the town was strangled by neglect. Number 2. Port Hughes, South Australia. Port Hughes, located on the Yorke Peninsula, was once a bustling holiday town with a population that swelled from 100 permanent residents to over 2,000 during peak summer weeks. The town's beaches, protected by limestone reefs, offered calm swimming conditions perfect for young families. The foreshore was lined with fibro shacks painted in pastel colours, and the local pub, the Port Hughes Tavern, was packed every Friday night with holidaymakers and fishermen swapping stories over cold beers. The town's economy relied on two things: summer tourism and crayfishing. Local fishermen worked the reefs year-round, supplying crayfish to markets in Adelaide and beyond. The annual crayfish season opening in November coincided with the start of the summer holiday rush, creating a vibrant atmosphere where visitors could buy fresh crayfish directly from fishermen on the jetty. But over the past 20 years, both industries have been gutted. Crayfish quotas were reduced to protect dwindling stocks, forcing many fishermen to sell their licenses or leave the industry altogether. At the same time, coastal property prices skyrocketed as wealthy buyers from Adelaide snapped up beachfront shacks as investment properties. What was once affordable holiday accommodation became unaffordable. Working families stopped coming. Today, Port Hughes is a shell of its former self. The pub closed in 2018 after struggling to attract enough customers. The foreshore shacks, once filled with families every summer, now sit empty for most of the year, their owners visiting for a weekend here and there. The general store operates on reduced hours, and the primary school, which once had over 60 students, closed in 2015 due to falling enrollment. Port Hughes shows how rising property prices can destroy the very communities they are supposed to enrich. The town became too expensive for the people who made it thrive. Number 3. Wallaroo Mines, South Australia. Wallaroo Mines is not technically on the coast, but it sits just 5 kilometres inland from the beach town of Wallaroo and shares its fate. This town was built around copper mining in the 1800s and thrived until the mines closed in 1923. For decades afterward, Wallaroo Mines survived as a quiet agricultural town, with locals farming wheat and barley on the surrounding plains while enjoying easy access to the beach. The town had everything a small community needed: a post office, a primary school, 2 general stores, a bakery, and a mechanic. Families from Adelaide would rent farmhouses in Wallaroo Mines during summer, using it as a base to visit the nearby beaches without paying coastal prices. But as farming became less profitable due to droughts and falling grain prices, younger families left. The school closed in 2007 when student numbers dropped below 15. The post office shut down in 2012. The bakery, which had operated since 1938, closed in 2016 when the owner retired and no one wanted to take over. Today, Wallaroo Mines consists of about 50 permanent residents, most of them retirees. The town streets are lined with empty stone cottages, their roofs caved in, their windows smashed. The old copper smelter ruins stand as a haunting reminder of the town's industrial past. Visitors occasionally stop to photograph the ruins before driving on to Wallaroo, but the town itself is functionally dead. Wallaroo Mines is a case study in agricultural decline and the death of rural Australia. Without young families, schools close. Without schools, families do not move in. The cycle feeds itself until nothing remains. Number 4, Pine Point, South Australia. Pine Point, located on the southern Yorke Peninsula, was a holiday haven in the 1970s and 80s. The town sits on a narrow strip of land between Gulf St. Vincent and Hardwick Bay, offering sheltered beaches on both sides. Families would camp in the sand dunes, fish from the rocky headlands, and spend long summer days exploring tidal pools. The town had no shops, no infrastructure, just a cluster of fibro shacks and a sense of freedom that attracted working-class families from Adelaide. In the 1990s, the South Australian government declared Pine Point part of a conservation zone, restricting development and eventually banning new building permits. The intention was to protect the fragile dune ecosystem from overdevelopment, but the policy had unintended consequences. Without the ability to upgrade or expand infrastructure, the town stagnated. The fibro shacks, already basic, fell into disrepair. Septic systems failed and could not be replaced under the new regulations. Access roads deteriorated without council funding. By the early 2000s, most of the shacks had been abandoned. Families who once returned every summer stopped coming, unwilling to stay in properties without running water or working toilets. The government eventually purchased and demolished several shacks, citing environmental concerns. Today, Pine Point is almost entirely empty. A few hardy locals remain in the handful of shacks still standing, but the town that once hosted hundreds of holidaymakers is now a landscape of concrete slabs and overgrown dune vegetation. Pine Point demonstrates the dangers of conservation policies that do not consider the human cost. Protecting the environment is important, but the complete abandonment of a community is a tragedy that could have been avoided with better planning. Number 5. Port Germein, South Australia. Port Germein, situated on the eastern shore of Spencer Gulf, was once home to South Australia's longest jetty. Stretching 1.5 kilometres into the shallow Gulf waters, the jetty was built in 1878 to allow ships to dock and load wheat from the surrounding agricultural districts. The town thrived as a shipping hub, with a population of over 800 at its peak in the early 1900s. After road and rail transport replaced shipping, the jetty fell into commercial disuse, but it became a beloved tourist attraction. Fishermen lined the jetty every weekend. Families walked its length to watch sunsets over the Gulf, and the town's caravan park filled with visitors during summer. The Port Germein Hotel, built in 1876, became a regional icon, serving meals and cold beers to locals and tourists alike. But in 2008, a section of the jetty collapsed during a storm, rendering the entire structure unsafe. The state government declared the jetty off-limits, erected fencing, and promised repairs. 15 years later, the jetty remains closed, slowly rotting into the Gulf. Without the jetty, the main drawcard for tourists disappeared. The caravan park closed in 2012. The pub struggled and finally shut its doors in 2019. Today, Port Germein has a population of around 150, mostly retirees. The main street is lined with empty shop fronts. The historic buildings are crumbling. The jetty, visible from every part of town, stands as a monument to government failure. Port Germein's story is about broken promises. The infrastructure that built the town was allowed to rot, and with it, the community died. Number 6. Hardwick Bay, South Australia. Hardwick Bay, on the western side of the Yorke Peninsula, was a popular fishing and camping destination throughout the 20th century. The bay's sheltered waters made it ideal for families with young children, and the surrounding cliffs offered excellent rock fishing. During the 1970s, the bay hosted a thriving caravan park, a general store, and a small fishing fleet that supplied local markets with snapper and King George whiting. The town's decline began with the introduction of strict marine park regulations in the early 2000s. Large sections of the bay were declared no-take zones, restricting where locals could fish. The commercial fishing fleet, already struggling with reduced quotas, found it unprofitable to continue operating from Hardwick Bay. One by one, the boats were sold or moved to other ports. At the same time, the caravan park changed ownership multiple times, each new owner raising prices and reducing amenities. Families who had camped at Hardwick Bay for generations found themselves priced out. The general store, which relied on summer trade, closed in 2013 after a particularly poor season. Today, Hardwick Bay is almost deserted. The caravan park operates at a fraction of its capacity, with most sites empty even during peak summer weeks. The boat ramp is cracked and overgrown with seaweed. A few fibro shacks remain occupied, but the sense of community that once defined the town is gone. Hardwick Bay shows how marine conservation, while necessary, can destroy coastal economies if not managed with local input. The fishermen were not consulted, the community was not compensated, and the town was left to die. Number 7. Pondalowie Bay, South Australia. Pondalowie Bay, within Innes National Park at the Yorke Peninsula tip, was beloved by surfers and fishermen from the 60s through early 2000s. Consistent swells attracted surfers across South Australia, and rocky headlands offered excellent salmon fishing. The area became part of Innes National Park in 1970, bringing strict development regulations. Over following decades, the government removed private shacks, citing environmental protection. Pondalowie Bay Resort struggled under increasing park fees and closed permanently in 2017. Today, Pondalowie Bay is accessible only to day visitors and campers, paying park entry fees many consider excessive. The shacks are gone, the resort shuttered. The environment is protected, but cultural heritage is erased. Number 8. Marion Bay, South Australia. Marion Bay, at the southern Yorke Peninsula end, was once the peninsula's premier beach destination. The long sandy beach, protected by offshore reefs, offered safe swimming and excellent fishing. During the 80s and 90s, Marion Bay's population swelled to over 5,000 during Christmas and Easter holidays. The town had 2 general stores, a bakery, fish and chip shop, pub, and thriving fishing fleet. But as property values rose, Adelaide and Melbourne investors bought holiday homes as investments. These homes sat empty most of the year, reducing foot traffic for local businesses. The bakery closed in 2009. One general store shut in 2015. The pub changed hands multiple times before closing in 2020. Today, Marion Bay is quiet. Caravan parks operate at low capacity, shops are closed, streets empty except during brief holiday peaks. When holiday homes become investments rather than destinations, communities lose their foundation. Number 9. Elliston, South Australia. Elliston, on the Eyre Peninsula west coast, is famous for dramatic coastal cliffs and clifftop sculpture trail. In the 90s and early 2000s, Elliston was a thriving fishing town with over 400 residents. The local fleet supplied abalone, crayfish, and King George whiting to markets across Australia. Decline began with fishing regulation changes. Abalone quotas were slashed, responding to overfishing and abalone viral ganglioneuritis disease that decimated stocks. Crayfish quotas were also reduced. The fleet shrank from employing over 100 locals to a handful of boats. Tourism failed to replace lost fishing income. Elliston's remote location, over 650 kilometres from Adelaide, made attracting visitors difficult. Today, Elliston has around 300 residents. The school has fewer than 30 students. Several main street shops are empty. The town survives, but only just. Number 10. Venus Bay, South Australia. Venus Bay, on the Eyre Peninsula west coast, was a fishing and farming community. The sheltered bay made it a safe harbour for fishing boats, and surrounding farmland supported grain and sheep farming. Decline was driven by reduced fishing quotas, falling grain prices, and drought. Young families left. The primary school closed in 2005. The general store shut in 2011. Today, Venus Bay has around 30 residents, mostly retirees. The boat ramp is still used by recreational fishermen, but the commercial fleet is gone. Streets are lined with abandoned houses. Venus Bay is dying quietly. Number 11. Smoky Bay, South Australia. Smoky Bay, on the Eyre Peninsula, West Coast, was built entirely on oyster farming. Sheltered waters and nutrient-rich currents made it ideal for growing Pacific oysters, and by the 90s, Smoky Bay produced millions of oysters annually. The industry supported over 200 residents. In 2013, disaster struck. Toxic algae bloom spread through the bay, killing millions of oysters and forcing farm closures. The industry struggled to recover, and many farmers went bankrupt. Increasing competition from other oyster regions in South Australia and Tasmania made it harder to compete on price. The population has fallen to around 150. The oyster industry operates at smaller scale. Several processing facilities are closed and abandoned. The pub reduced operating hours, and the general store struggles to stay viable. Smoky Bay shows the fragility of single industry towns. Number 12. Streaky Bay, South Australia. Streaky Bay, the largest town on this list, sits on the Eyre Peninsula, West Coast, with around 1,000 residents. Unlike other towns discussed, Streaky Bay is not a ghost town, but it is in visible decline. The economy traditionally relied on fishing, farming, and tourism. However, fishing has been hit hard by quota reductions, and farming has suffered from prolonged drought. Tourism remains steady but has not grown enough to offset losses in other sectors. The main street has multiple empty shop fronts, and several motels and caravan parks have closed in recent years. The primary and high schools remain open, but enrollment is declining. Young people leave for university or work in larger cities and rarely return. The aging population struggles to maintain infrastructure and services. Streaky Bay is not dead, but it is a town fighting for survival. It represents the future many coastal towns face. So what have we learned from these 12 towns? First, single industry economies are fragile. When fishing quotas are reduced, when mines close, when farms become unprofitable, entire communities collapse. There is no safety net, no backup plan. A town built on one industry is gambling with its future. Second, government neglect accelerates decline. Broken jetties, closed schools, and failed infrastructure make it impossible for towns to recover. When Port Germain's jetty collapsed and was never repaired, the town lost its only tourist drawcard. When Pine Point was locked into conservation regulations without infrastructure support, the community was doomed. Third, rising property prices can destroy the communities they are supposed to benefit. When working families are priced out of coastal towns, the seasonal influx of tourists that kept local businesses alive disappears. Empty investment properties do not buy fish and chips or fill caravan parks. But the deeper truth is this: Australia has allowed its coastal towns to die through a combination of policy failure, economic short-sightedness, and cultural indifference. We celebrate cheap holidays in Bali and Thailand while the towns that built Australian holiday culture rot along our own coastline. We protect our marine environments with blanket no-take zones without considering the fishermen who have worked these waters for generations. We allow property speculation to turn affordable holiday destinations into empty investment portfolios that benefit no one but wealthy city-based owners. These 12 towns are not anomalies. They are stark warnings. Coastal Australia is changing rapidly, and not for the better. The question is whether we care enough to do something about it, or whether we will simply let paradise slip away while we look the other way.